So in this video we're going to continue looking at the impulse response. Now in the last video we got to the point where we had a little system and we had decided that we could characterize that system in terms of an impulse response. So we could write the impulse response in a time, in terms of time, h of t, or impulse response in the frequency domain we'll just call h of j omega. So this little system here means that we would have an input, and if the input, we could write the input in the frequency domain h of j omega, and also in the time domain is x of t. Then the output to this system then we could write in terms of the frequency domain as y of j omega, and in the time domain would be y of t. So we kind of looked at one half of it. We were able to decide that in order to get the output y of j omega, we could get that output by multiplying the impulse response in the frequency domain h of j omega with the input in the frequency domain x of j omega. Okay, so we've done that half of the work, and it seemed quite obvious from the way we set out the argument that that's going to be the case. So we've already gone through and shown that. Now what we want to do in this video is to go and show the other part of it. What we want to do is we want to create we want to do the same sort of thing as this, but we want to do it in the time domain. So we're looking to have a time domain function, and we're going to say the time domain function equals it's the time domain impulse response, and we're going to have our time domain input. And it turns out, and this is the thing that we just kind of left hanging from the last videos, that that there would have to be the convolution of those two. Okay, so that's the thing we didn't really have a look at much of a grasp on, so we're going to get that on this video. Okay, so really what we want to show is that convolution in the time domain is equal to multiplication in the frequency domain. And I've already actually got a derivation of that in one of the other channels than the mathematics of continuous time signals, so there's a full derivation of that, so you can always drop in and have a look at that derivation. So when we look at this section 2 here, we want to kind of prove that this is the case, and the way we're going to do it is we're going to split it into two. So the first thing is that we want to do is we want to think about the function x of t, and we want to think about that function as a weighted sum of shifted impulses. So what do I mean by that? So graphically, if you had some function there, so that's your function x of t, and what you want to do is you want to think about that function there as being a weighted sum of shifted impulses. So there's an impulse there, so that the first impulse is at that point there, okay, and then you shift the impulse along to that point there, and it gets weighted by the height of this function here, x of t. So you're shifting it along again, and it gets weighted in height, and you shift it along, and you shift it along. Okay, so you just end up with a function up here, this side here, which is just a set of weighted and shifted impulses, and of course they're all summed up so that they look like that function. Okay, so that's the kind of the basic premise that we're going to work on. So the reason for doing that is that if that's the case, if we can think about the input as in terms of weighted and shifted impulses, then because we've made the system linear, because it's linear, and we've also made it time invariant, it means that we're able then to say that the output will also be a sum of shifted and weighted, but it won't be a shifted and weighted impulse function, it's going to be a sum of shifted and weighted impulse responses, okay, which are our h of t's. Okay, so if we can show 1 and then 2 we've already kind of shown to you anyway in the previous video. Okay, so but these are the two facts. If these two facts are true, then it means that we can think about the output as being a convolution with the impulse response and the input signal. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll look at both of these. So we'll start off at number 1. So the first one's a wee bit of maths, but we'll just work our way through. So let's imagine we had some random function. So we draw out the function like that, and we just come up here, and that's some function of time. That's time there. Then what we could do is we could pick some point along the graph. Okay, there's that point there, right? And we could just pick a little area element. So I've extended this so obviously you can see it, but we've got a little area element there. Okay, so if that's one of them, we could do it. We could pick another one of these and shift it to this point here. Okay, so we could shift it along to there, and it'd be a bit up the centre. And we could take one of these and shift it to this side and shift it there. So we can shift these all the way along this axis. But so if this, we make that distance there. So we'll make the distance there t. Then there will be one here, so there will be one here that will be t. There will be another one that will be along 2t, and the one that will be along 3t and 4t. So in this point in general, that point there is going to be nt. It's just going to be the nth one of these little areas. Okay, so that's nt there. So the height of that there, well, it's just the function. So it's just going to be the function. It's just going to be f of nt. So it means that this little area element here, you can write that little area element there as f of nt times, so that's just the height, times the width. The width is t. Okay, so that's a little area element. But now what we want to do is we want to be able to introduce the idea of the impulse function, and you can introduce that quite simply, because what you can say is that if that's an area, so for example, let's say we work at that area and the area ends up as, say, 5. Well, that's exactly the same as saying 5 times 1. Okay, so it's an area of 5 times an area of 1. Okay, so what we could do is we can pick an area of 1 here, so we can draw a line here. Okay, and we can say, well, let's make that area equal to 1. Now, in order for that area to equal 1, we know that's t. Okay, so that width is t. So for that area to equal 1, that height there must be 1 upon t. Okay, so that must be 1 upon t. So if we're writing this thing here as f of nt times t times 1, okay, well, that's equivalent to writing f of nt times t. Now that area there is going to be represented by our now 1 upon t. Okay, because we want this value here to equal 1. Okay, so the height there would have to be 1 upon t, but the actual function itself, right, the function itself there, well, it doesn't need to be a square wave. It could be anything. It could be a triangular wave. Okay, so it could be a triangle, or it could be any sort of function. It doesn't really matter. The whole point is it's just some even function whose area is equal to 1. So in this instance here, we pick the rectangle because it's an easier one to work with, because we can get this area quite simply dividing that height by 1 upon t. So we're taking that here, which is a function, and again we've just picked a random function, but we'll call the function p, and the function p is again positioned anywhere along the axis here, so it's going to be p of t minus nt. Okay, so it means that we've got, if we were to write out this again and say it in different terms, so we can kind of say, we can say that we've got f of nt times t, okay, which is a scaling factor, okay, and our other function here is going to be our 1 upon t, and it's our generating function. Okay, I'll use that term, a generating function, t minus nt, because in effect what we're going to be generating will be the delta function. Okay, so we'll go to that point there, and what we have is that will become the delta function whenever we take the limit, and that will be the scaling factor. Okay, so if we go ahead and take this limit, so what we're looking at is, we just, first of all, if we were to look at the limit as t tends to 0, so we're just going to make this distance here get smaller and smaller and smaller. Okay, so the width's getting smaller and smaller. So in that case, if we make the width smaller, smaller, so say the limit there of our generating function t minus nt, then that limit there will just tend towards our delta function, which is a delayed delta function. Okay, delta t minus nt. Okay, so I'm just really working through this one here, because remember what we're really saying here at this point here is that the delta function can be built up from a little block, and it can be, if you make that width t, the height would be 1 upon t. So if we make t tend towards 0, so let's say we half t, then we'd have to double the height to keep the area 1. Okay, because the delta function is it's really a distribution. Okay, it's actually an area function. So if we were to half that again, we'd have to double that height again. Okay, we keep halving it and doubling the height, so we end up with an extremely narrow pulse of very large height, but the area always remains at 1. And again, the point about the generating function is you can generate that by any function. You could generate that by a function that looks like that, a triangular wave, and you could half the distance and double the height. You can half the distance and double the height, and you can keep doing that to generate the same function. Or even more complicated, you could take some other function that looks like, say, like the sinc function, and you can half the crossover points here and then double the height, and half the crossover points again and double the height, and you can generate that same delta function. Okay, so let me just rub these out. Okay, I wasn't really wanting to go down as far down that route, but we'll just mention it anyway. Okay, so, and also another thing that, as I mentioned, that the delta function there is actually a distribution. So what we're really saying is that if we take the integral of the delta function by dt from minus infinity to infinity, it equals 1. So we're really saying it's just some function whose area is always going to be equal to 1. Right, so it means that whenever we are looking at what we've got above, all we're doing is we're taking this thing here, which is t tends towards 0. This will tend towards a delta function, okay, and it will tend towards it in this instance here in terms of a little, in terms of a square block, okay, and the area of that square block is going to be the height of the block there, which actually will be t divided by the width, or times the width, which will be 1 upon t. Okay, so we're taking that limit t tends towards 0 of this here becomes that delta function. Okay, and in the delta function, remember the delta function is just like a little area. So we've got that wee note here, so that's just a kind of note of what happens whenever we take that limit. Okay, but now we'll actually take the limit of the whole thing. So we'll take the limit, and remember we're generating this not just for that one, but for this one here, and the one before, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. We're doing this all the way along the function. Okay, so we're summing all of these up all the way along the function. Okay, so what we can say then is what we're going to look at, we're going to look at the limit as t tends to 0 of the sum of all of these little strips, okay, which is going to be f of nt, and that's our 1 upon t, and the generating function p of t minus nt, that's big T, all times that value of t. Now the thing to notice is that if we say t tends towards 0, so this distance here tends towards 0, but the thing is, if that distance tends towards 0, then the number of actual elements n will tend towards infinity, okay? Because we're going to have more and more and more elements as the distance t gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So it means then as t tends towards 0, our n tends towards infinity. So this term here, nt, tends towards a constant. So nt tends towards a constant. Obviously it's along a time axis, so it's actually a time. So we'll give the time a dummy variable and we'll call it tau. Okay, so we can see that our nt is equal to our value of tau. So when we do this limit here, the sum will become the integral from minus infinity to infinity. F of nt was going to become our f of tau. Right, the 1 upon t, p of t minus nt, again we've seen that above, that's just going to become our delta t minus, well, nt, which is tau. Delta t minus tau, and the small element t as well is going to be a wee differential, which is a small element d tau. Okay, so that there is really, that's there is the convolution operator. So what we're saying here is we've created a function f of t. So we've created a function f of t. So we said f of t is going to equal to, well, that's the same as saying f of t convolved with delta t minus tau. Okay, so really that's us proved the first part of what we were looking at. We were saying we can think of a function y of t, if I got it written down here. Yeah, I've never actually written that down. So we can think of a function, say x of t, as being a summation of shifted and weighted impulses, okay, here, and that's exactly what we've showed through this little proof here. We can think of this function, if we just replace that with our x of t, it's a convolution of itself with, it's actually, I'll rewrite that because it's a bit not quite right then, isn't it? Because if I put the convolution operator in, so it's the function itself convolved with delta t. Okay, the delta t minus tau, I mean that's taken care of in the convolution operator here. Okay, so we've shown the first part of it. Okay, so that's really the hard part, and I think what we'll do is we can continue on, and we've already kind of seen the second part, but we'll just go through it anyway. Okay, so the second part is that because it's linear and time invariant, it means that we can think about the output as being a summation of shifted and weighted impulse response functions. Okay, so we can show that here just now. So if we were to think about, so this is really part 2, I suppose. So part 2, if we were to think about a function here, right, so that's a delta function, so we can say that's delta t. When we put that through our little system, we get our response. Now the response we get in the time domain, we'll call it h of t. So let's say that's the response that we get. Because the system is time invariant, what it means is I could take this same value here, I could shift it over to there. Okay, so that's delta t minus some value t naught. So that's t naught there. So when I shift that over there, because it is time invariant, all that happens is we get the same output, but it's just delayed because we've just done it 3 seconds later. So we've got the same output here, just delayed. Okay, so it's just a delayed function. Now, because the system is linear as well, is that I could take this delta t and I could put in a larger value of delta t. So I could say a times delta t. So when I put that in, because it is linear, it means that the output here will just become a linear function of this value here. So it means that each value here is just going to be multiplied by a constant. So we're just going to get a bigger version of the same graph. So it's not going to be distorted in any way. We're just going to have the same but just taller. So because of these two facts, it means that you can use superposition, and you can then say, well, if I think about all of these three together, so I can think about, let's say I think about a function there, an impulse there, and an impulse of that height there, then what I can do is, because I can just add these things together, I can take the first one, which is the impulse there, impulse response. I can take the second one, which is a delayed and weighted version of that same impulse response, and then I can take another one, which is another delayed and weighted version of the impulse response, like that, and I can add all three together. So I can superpose all three, which will give us something, I don't know what it looks like, but give something there, and that there is going to be your output y of t. Okay, now an extension to that, so that's really part 2 of that. Okay, and of course part 1 we've already seen is that we can think of a function there as being a convolution with itself with an impulse function. So if I was to take some random function, then I can think of the random function as being a summation of weighted and shifted impulses. Okay, so we've shown that in 1, and because it's linear and time invariant, it means that the weighted and shifted impulses in this input, because it's linear and time invariant, means that we're going to get weighted and shifted impulse responses, and the output, which is again is just this thing here, which is just the output. Okay, so that really is the idea behind the impulse response method. So it means that we're able to say that if, and I'll just write it out as I say it, so if we can think about the input x of t as being a convolution, or if we think about the input x of t as being created by a weighted and shifted summation of weighted and shifted impulses, so the summation and weighted shifted impulses is the delta t bit. Okay, and the summation of the weighted and shifted is the actual convolution. That's what convolution is. Okay, so if we look at that in terms of the input, okay, so if I think that's what the input is going to look like, it means that via linearity and the time invariance, it means that the output must be, and that's y of t, I'll put y of t is the summation of weighted and shifted impulse responses. So it's h of t convolved with the function here, input x of t. Okay, so that really there is at the heart of that impulse response method. I think I laboured it a bit there when I talked through that line. Okay, but that's the heart of it. So it means that you are able to say that from the top of this section here, you're able to say that the convolution in the time domain, okay, that h of t convolved with x of t is equivalent to multiplication in the frequency domain, so y of j omega equals h of j omega times x of j omega. Okay, so that's a kind of maybe a bit more kind of wording than I'd expected, wording and a bit of maths, so description of this impulse response. Now, one other thing that's worthwhile doing, and I think it might actually be really quite worthwhile, is to actually draw the convolution out, as I did previously on previous videos in the other channel, I drew a video out of the actual convolution in 3D, so I'll try and make an effort to do that here. So if we imagine we had an input, and again this is a kind of 3D thing, so we'll give it a go, but imagine we had an input there, right? So that's our input function, okay, and so that's our x, but we'll give it the dummy variable. Instead of t, we'll give it the variable tau. So read x of tau, that's our tau axis, okay. Then what we can do is we can split up the t and tau axis. So if I just draw a kind of square block like that, okay, now, and we can say that if we think about this function here as being a summation of weighted and shifted impulses, so we'll take our first impulse. There's our first impulse there. Now that first impulse there, I'll just draw it down at this point here, is going to produce an impulse response. So this axis here is the t-axis, so that's the tau direction there, and this axis here, if I draw it down like that, that's the t-axis. So tau axis and t-axis. So the very first impulse that will come in is going to create some response. Let's say the response looks something like that. Okay, so that's just our h of t. Okay, so that's just an h of t. Now, if we wait, again, we're going to make this the sum of weighted and shifted impulses. So we'll shift the impulse, right? The impulse will also be weighted. It just means it's a slightly different height, so I'm not drawing that so well, but that's a different height there, so it's weighted and shifted. So it means that what we're going to get out here is a weighted and shifted version of this, okay? So we're going to get the first one coming in here at the 0, so let's say that's 0 there. So our first one's going to come in looking like that, okay? Whoops, that's just that impulse response. Next one is a weighted and shifted, so it's shifted in time, so we're going to wait. So we're over here at this point here, but we're going to have to wait for a little section, okay, because there's nothing happens there because it gets shifted in time and it gets weighted as well. So it's similar to this but slightly different shape, okay, it's slightly different, okay. And then if you come over further over here a bit further and further over here, and let's say that the signal comes up like that, and you've got another one away over here, then away over at this point here, I'll draw a line down there, then you're going to have a delayed, so the delay again is in the t-axis, so we're going to come away along here and we don't get it until that point there, and again it's shifted and weighted. So we're shifting in effect. If I can maybe just draw a couple of them, we're kind of shifting and delaying, so it's a delay, well it's a shifting and waiting. When we're shifting and waiting each of these all the way along here, okay, so all these are getting delayed here, so that's a shifting here in this direction, and the heights are getting changed as well by the weighting factor of this function. And then what we're going to do is we adding all of these values up in that direction, so we're integrating in that direction, so we're adding all the wee heights up, that height and that height there, and say that height there, so we're adding all these up in that direction, okay, to get an actual height here. And what we're going to get is all the different heights here on the output. Okay, so that there is just going to be your output function, which is going to be your y of t. So we're just convolving the input with the impulse response, and we're getting the output here. Okay, so that's pretty much it. So I'll just go back to the last page and just one recap here. The most important points are that we can think of a function as being a sum of weighted and shifted impulses, and if we can think about the function like that, then we know via the fact of linearity and time invariance that the output must also be a sum of weighted and shifted, but not impulses. It's going to be a weighted and shifted value of whatever that output is. In this instance here, it's the impulse response. Okay, so that's all there is to this one, and that's the last on the impulse response. And we'll move on. We'll look at some other things of a similar nature. Okay, thank you. Bye bye.